All right. Doctor Who, William Hartnell. Back to the notes. Okay. Previously, I have gone to Spoiler Town when I've done these Doctor Who series of videos. I've focused on I focused on one specific story for each of the doctors that I discussed previously. I'm going to do this one differently. I'm not going to focus on just one story for William Hartnell. I will be going to Spoiler Town for one episode of one story, a two-part story, and a condensed lost story. Which will be the equivalent of 1, 2, 3, 4 episodes, which I had done previously for, there was a 4-episode story that I discussed previously for Peter Davison and Sylvester McCoy. Was that it? And the John Pertwee one was, I think, 7 episodes. That was the longest. 6 episodes for Patrick Troughton, Tom Baker. Oh, the Colin Baker one, I think that one was 4 episodes. And then I did one for Richard E. Grant, which was, I think, that was done differently because that was like a webcast. I think that had several short episodes, but it came into under the equivalent of a 4-episode of under the equivalent of a 4-episode of the classic time of Doctor Who. That's how I will say that. Okay. Anyway, I figured, well, it's nice because this is different the way I'm doing it. But if I do at least the equivalent of a 4-episode story, then it will be fair because I wanted to be fair to each discussion of each doctor that I talked about. I didn't want to just do for William Hartnell. I didn't want to just do 1 episode or even just 2 episodes. I figured, well, if I do this condensed lost story, then it will make up for only talking about 3 episodes previously. Okay. Although that John Pertwee sure got a lot of attention because that Inferno was definitely a long story. Anyway, okay, enough of that. All right, the first episode I want to talk about to say what happens in it is An Unearthly Child. That's I feel an appropriate place to start. First episode. which was on the beginning box set collection. Okay. This is where it began. This is where all of Doctor Who began, with this story. Well, this episode. This episode. An unearthly child. Oh, I'm going to read the back. All right, this is what it says on the back of An Unearthly Child. Here's the description of this story. Susan Foreman is a mystery to teachers Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, seemingly knowing more than she should about the past and the future. Their curiosity leads them to follow her home one night, only to find that her home appears to be a deserted junkyard. In the junkyard, they discover an odd police box and a strange old man who claims to be Susan's grandfather and calls himself the Doctor. The journey of a lifetime is about to begin. The first ever story of the world's longest running science fiction series comes to DVD for the first time. Okay. This was made in 1963, black and white, approximately 95 minutes. Starring William Hartnell with William Russell, Jacqueline Hill, and Carol Ann Ford. Written by Anthony Coburn, directed by Waris Hussein, produced by... all I had to do was look at this DVD. The last video, I was trying to remember her name. Produced by Verity Lambert. Incidental music by Norman Kay. Doctor Who and TARDIS are trademarks of the BBC. Originally transmitted November 23rd to December 14th, 1963. Okay, there that is. Now it's time to go to Spoiler Town. I thought it was kind of amusing to call this Spoiler Town because it just reminded me of that song that song about going to Funky Town. Funky Town. That's why I've been saying let's go to Spoiler Town. All right, here we go. This is how it begins. This is what happens in the first episode of Doctor Who. Something unusual with this... Something unusual with this episode of Doctor Who was that the theme music doesn't stop when the first scene begins. I thought that was strange. We see an English policeman a Bobby patrolling on foot through fog outside a junkyard. A Bobby. Let's look at my New Oxford American Dictionary. Bobby. British informal, a police officer, origin mid-19th century, nickname for Robert, given name of Sir Robert Peel. Thought that was interesting. Okay, back to what happens in the first episode of Doctor Who. Okay. The Bobby walks away. The camera moves close to the doors to the junkyard, and a door creaks open by itself. The camera enters the junkyard. Okay. This camera work reminded me of the intro to Tales from the Crypt, which was a nice, creepy introduction to that show, Tales from the Crypt. Good music to that, too. I think that was Danny Elfman who did the music for that. Okay, back to Doctor Who. The camera shows some junk, and then we see, for the first time on Doctor Who, the TARDIS police box. This is when the theme song stops, and we see the opening credits. The next scene takes place at Coal Hill School. Classes are done, and two teachers are talking in an empty classroom, which I believe is Ian Chesterton's classroom. Okay, Barbara Wright is telling Ian Chesterton that she had a terrible day and she doesn't know what to make of it. She mentions Susan Foreman, and Ian implies he's had trouble with her too. He says Susan lets her knowledge out a bit at a time so as not to embarrass me. She knows more science than I'll ever know. She's a genius. Barbara tells Ian that she offered to work with Susan at home because Susan was interested in specializing in history. Susan told Barbara that that would be absolutely impossible as her grandfather didn't like strangers. Ian tells Barbara he's a doctor, isn't he? That's a bit of a lame excuse. Barbara tells Ian that she went to the address provided by the secretary for Susan's address, 76 Totters Lane, and said it was just a junkyard. Ian agrees to go with Barbara to the junkyard to wait and see where Susan goes after school. I have a little parenthetical here in my notes. It does sound strange that two teachers would be following a student home after school. I guess, from their perspective, they're just curious and concerned for Susan's safety. Okay. Before they go, they meet Susan in Barbara's classroom. Barbara had told Susan to wait there while she got a book for her to borrow. Ian and Barbara leave, and Susan stays in the classroom to look at the book Barbara had brought for her. It's a book on the French Revolution. Susan opens the book and begins to read. She says, "But that's not right." Ian and Barbara park outside 76 Totters Lane and wait for Susan to show up at the junkyard. Barbara tells Ian that Susan thought England was on the decimal system. Susan told Barbara, of course the decimal system hasn't started yet. Ian tells Barbara nothing about this girl makes sense. For instance, the other day I was talking about chemical changes. I'd given out the litmus paper to show cause and effect. The answer simply didn't interest her. Did not interest Susan. Susan had told Mr. Chesterton, I can see red turns to blue, but that's because we're dealing with two inactive chemicals. They only act in relation to each other. Mr. Chesterton told Susan, but that's the whole point of the experiment. Susan then said, yes, it's a bit obvious. It's a bit obvious, isn't it? Well, I'm not trying to be rude, but couldn't we deal with two active chemicals? Then red could turn blue all by itself, and we could get on with something else. I'm sorry, it was just an idea. And there's an awkward moment in the classroom. Ian tells Barbara that Susan means it. These simple experiments are child's play to her. Ian then tells Barbara that he'd set the class a problem with A, B, and C as the three dimensions. Susan had said it's impossible unless you use D and E. You can't simply work on three of the dimensions. Mr. Chesterton said to Susan, oh, time being the fourth, I suppose. Then what do you need E for? What do you make the fifth dimension? Susan tells Mr. Chesterton, space. Ian and Barbara see Susan enter the junkyard. Barbara tells Ian that she's frightened as if we're about to interfere in something that is best left alone. Ian and Barbara leave the car and enter the junkyard. Okay. All right, I have another parenthetical note. Okay. There was a funny moment when Ian stumbles and says that he's dropped the torch. Here in the United States, we would call what Ian dropped a flashlight. A torch is a stick of wood with fire on one end. I'm sure the British also use torch for that as well. I just thought that was funny when I noticed that. Why are they calling a flashlight a torch? They probably do that in other... maybe they do that in Australia too. Or Canada. Alright, I think I better stop here because this video is already pretty long. I just want to keep going because I just want to get this all done with. Just want to get this done with because there's a lot left, but I can go through it quickly as long as I don't stop and talk about other stuff. Anyway. Time for breakfast. Smoothie time and toast with marinara.